functional testing that's shortchanged, and that's a classic testing worst practice that we blunder into as testers, and so really would encourage you to use that list of risk categories. Now, you can tailor that, and you can add and delete and so forth, and that's by all means your prerogative to do. But you know, I would say don't just exclude categories of quality risks other than functionality. It's like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about that, because really we should. Okay, so question came up in an earlier session of this that I want to address, which is how risk-based testing works with the different life cycle models, where it fits in. So if you're following a sequential approach, like was the case in the case study that we looked at, the pilot, what you're going to do is you're going to try to do your risk analysis in parallel with the requirement specification, using a draft of the requirement specification as an input into that process. And then periodically at major milestones, such as approval of the requirement specification and the finalization of the design specification and completion of implementation and unit testing, and then you know, after the first say 25% of test execution, these periodic intervals, you're going to look at the new information that you've got and then adjust your risk analysis, add new risk items, adjust likelihood and impact for existing risk items, reprioritize your tests and so forth. Usually what you find, if change is reasonably well managed on the project, that those are fairly incremental changes that you're making. Now, in an iterative life cycle, instead of doing one big risk analysis all at the front, what you do is you do a iteration-specific risk analysis, which of course is going to be smaller for each one of the iterations, and so it's focused, and the effort is less than well, for each iteration, the effort is less than the effort required to do a bigger risk analysis. Now, when you get into the Agile world, then what you're typically going to do in the Agile approach is you have a separate risk analysis at the beginning of each sprint or iteration for the Agile approach, and that's going to be very lightweight. It's focused just on risks associated with the user stories that are being created for that particular sprint and any other non-functional areas that you need to look at. So then it becomes a very, very lightweight kind of thing. Now, let's see. Sarah's got a follow-on question here of, can we use this approach with exploratory testing, use the stakeholder's vision to determine what to explore most? Well, Sarah, I do want to see a blended approach that includes some amount of reactive testing, such as exploratory testing, in conjunction with risk analysis. But I would actually encourage you to not guide the exploratory testing by the risk analysis, but rather to let the testers use their own experience and judgment and intuition guide their exploratory testing. And here's why. One of the risks, if I may use that word, of any analytical testing strategy, and risk-based testing is clearly an analytical testing strategy, is that the analysis can be wrong. In fact, any analysis, to some extent, is wrong. The question is, to what extent is it wrong, and how big of a deal is that? So in the case of risk analysis, what's going to be wrong is you're probably going to be missing some risk items, and you're going to have some risk items that are misrated in terms of likelihood and impact. Now, you need to have something built into your process that allows you to counterbalance this, to counteract this. And this is where the reactive or exploratory testing comes in. What you're going to do is, by freeing up the testers to look in areas outside of where you've created the scripted tests using the risk analysis. And when I say scripted here, I just mean written. I don't necessarily mean any level of detail. But we free the testers to use exploratory testing in areas that might go beyond where our analysis told us to test. And then what we do is we look and see across all of our test results, including our exploratory testing, are we finding a lot of bugs where we said that the likelihood was going to be low? Or conversely, are we finding very few bugs where we said the likelihood was going to be high? Are we finding high impact bugs where we said that the impact was going to be low? Or conversely, are we finding low impact bugs where we said the impact was going to be high? Are we finding bugs in areas that we just had no inkling about? We have no identified risks for those. Now, so if any of those 5 things is true, and to some extent they will be true, that those indicate some sort of problem with your risk analysis. But see, it's difficult to find those kinds of things, especially the 5th one, the bugs in areas where we have no identified risk items, without freeing up the testers to say, look, when you're doing your exploratory testing, just look wherever you think you ought to look. Don't be constrained to the particular risks that were identified in the risk analysis. So I would say, definitely use exploratory testing as part of the your strategy, but set the testers free to go beyond the risks that were identified, and you'll get a much better result out of that. Okay, I got a question here from Jason saying, could you specify the quality risk category link? Jason, for the purposes of avoiding a long period of silence as I search around for it on my website, I'm not going to go do that right now. But what I can tell you is if you go out to, if you're on the RBCS website right now, there's a option of resources, and that generic quality risks list is either on the basic library page or it's on the advanced library page that's accessible underneath that resources selection on the RBCS website. So you can definitely find it there. It might take you a while to dig around because there's a lot of stuff there, but it is on one of those 2 pages. So the link is definitely to one of those 2 pages, and then you'll just have to look around for that list once you get to that page. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm not seeing any additional questions at this point. Okay, here we have one more coming in from C's. That's a good one. Have you encountered any disadvantages to risk-based testing? Okay, that's a good question, C's. I used to have some disadvantages with it when I followed a more formal approach. When I first got started doing risk-based testing, what I used was a technique called failure mode and effect analysis, which is very, very formalized. And the disadvantage there was that it's just a tremendous amount of work to do those spreadsheets that you have to do failure mode and effect analysis. And it's easily like 10 times as much verbiage as the lightweight technique that I just showed you. So over the years, I developed this lightweight technique that I call pragmatic risk analysis and management, and that really is, it provides all of the benefits without the tremendous overhead costs of the more formal techniques. So that's one way to help manage the disadvantages, is to use a technique at the appropriate level of formality, and you don't waste a lot of effort on things that aren't giving you a lot of incremental benefit. Now, are there specific cases where I can imagine not using risk-based testing? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I'm like our Sri Lankan operation, Software Test Works, we do outsourced testing, right? And in some cases, the client is going to say, look, what we want you to do is test these things. They're going to tell us exactly what to test. That's called a directed testing strategy, by the way. You're following a directed testing strategy when you're counting on someone else to tell you what to test. And that happens in outsourced testing not infrequently. So in that case, there would be absolutely no point in doing risk-based